Well, Democrats are investigating the U.S. president's decision to fire a federal watchdog critical of the Trump administration. The move comes as Donald Trump faces growing pressure over his handling of the pandemic. And to bring us the latest, let's go to Katie Simpson right now. She's in Washington. So, Katie, nice to see you. Let's talk about the removal of this investigator. What do we know about the backdoor politics of all this?
Well, the investigator who was removed from his post is a man named Steve Linick, and it was his job to look at any sort of waste that was going on inside the State Department. It's a position that is in all departments in the U.S. It is federal agencies. It's a person who is supposed to keep an eye out for any sort of waste or misuse of government dollars. Well, the reporting in the United States is that this individual, Mr. Linick, had launched an investigation into Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to find out if he and his wife had been using a political appointee at the State Department to carry out tasks for them on a personal basis. What exactly that is, it's unclear, but it was personal in nature and not up to the State Department. That's what we're hearing from a number of news agencies down here, and they're citing Democrats who are now looking into this. So on Friday night, there was a letter from the White House to Speaker Nancy Pelosi about the decision to remove Mr. Linick. Donald Trump saying that he no longer had confidence in Mr. Linick. However, again, there are reports that it was Mike Pompeo who had insisted to Donald Trump that he be fired. And now we are learning that perhaps part of the reason for that decision could be because he was looking into the activities of Mr. Pompeo. So Democrats are very concerned about those reports. They have launched an investigation to find out more about this. But Mr. Linick is not the first investigator or not the first person to hold this position to be removed by the Trump administration. The same person working for Health and Human Services, which is overseeing coronavirus, they were let go recently. At the Defense Department, same individual same position let go as well. The person who's supposed to oversee the spending of funding through the coronavirus emergency bill, again, let go as well. So there's a pattern here of the White House trying to remove people who are in positions to hold the government to account. Now, Donald Trump has been known to lash out against anyone who's perceived to be not loyal, as well as perceived to be his political enemies. He's under a lot of scrutiny these days and has been lashing out, whether it's through his briefings, any sort of his public appearances, or on Twitter. We've seen him really go after former President Barack Obama on Twitter. The more criticism and more scrutiny he receives for his handling of the coronavirus outbreak. And he went on Fox News, an interview that aired today, and he did that again today to accuse the former president of some sort of crime. However, he's not cited anything specific. Have a listen.
It was the greatest political crime in the history of our country. If I were a Democrat instead of a Republican, I think everybody would have been in jail a long time ago, and I'm talking with 50-year sentences. It is a disgrace what's happened. This is the greatest political scam.
So Donald Trump has not offered any specifics about what that is. He was asked at the White House last week about what on earth he's talking about, and he didn't have an answer.
Okay, Katie, thank you for that. Or Katie Simpson in Washington. Now, interestingly, Katie did mention Barack Obama. And last night in a speech, a virtual speech to students graduating for 2020, Barack Obama, in the second time in as many weeks, took aim at the Trump administration and its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a listen to former President Barack Obama.
More than anything, this pandemic has finally torn back the curtain on the idea that so many of the folks in charge know what they're doing. A lot of them aren't even pretending to be in charge.
And again, that was Barack Obama last night. And to talk a bit more about that speech, we're happy to have on the program today Roger Fisk. He is a former campaign strategist for the Barack Obama campaign, also a principal at New Day Strategy, joining us today in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. So, Mr. Fisk, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, as I said, second time in as many weeks that we heard from the former president criticizing the Trump administration's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm wondering if you can answer this question. Why are we hearing from Barack Obama now, considering the fact that, Trump, ever since he took office, has been criticizing Obama's record? Why now?
Yeah, the relationship with formers is always very, very interesting to me. I think there's a couple layers to your answer. One, it's a cycle year, and the presumptive nominee on the Democratic side is obviously the former vice president who served on the ticket with President Obama. So it would be natural for him to become more engaged in the fourth year of the presidency. It's relatively traditional and recognized by at least the most recent former presidents to give the new administration 2 or 3 years without kind of positioning oneself as kind of a shadow government who's there, responding every day to different headlines and things like that. President Bush did that with President Obama, and President Obama did that with the current occupant of the White House. But now that we're heading into the re-election year, you're going to see President Obama take on a higher profile.
So fair game then, because I think part of the reaction I've been hearing from people is this is not the gentleman's agreement between presidents, that he should be criticizing Donald Trump.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the time frame I just mentioned is essentially kind of the rule, which is the first 2 or 3 years. When we look at our immediate past, we don't have an example from President Obama's first campaign because President Bush was so unpopular at that time that Senator McCain's campaign chose not to highlight the former president. Obviously, former Vice President Biden is in a different situation where President Obama is still very, very popular. One of the things that's interesting is I think of the stories that aren't told, and one can have a pretty clear picture of what this president could be doing if he reached out to the formers and enlisted their help in this. President Clinton, President Bush, President Carter could be helping on housing, which is his passion, for example. President Obama could be helping on a challenge of this magnitude. All of the formers would step up if they were asked, as they've done with the earthquake in Haiti or any number of other cataclysmic events. But obviously, given the kind of ego and fragility of President Trump, he's not able to, invite other people into the spotlight. He would rather fail in the spotlight alone than try to succeed with a team.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I want to actually bring in some reaction from President Trump. Take a look. This was on his Twitter feed just in the last hour or so. A very simple tweet here in which he basically says Obamagate ! And that is the accusation that President Obama and his officials acted in his parlance criminally in the final days of the Obama presidency in an attempt to bring down Donald Trump as he was taking office. What do you make of that reaction from Donald Trump?
It's empty, and it's just as ridiculous as everything else that he says or does or thinks. This gentleman has been in control of the federal government for the last 3.5 years, and clearly he has an attorney general now who will snap a cat's neck when he's told to. So I think this is a classic case of if they could have, they would have. There's nothing stopping the Department of Justice or the current administration from opening up investigations, anything else. So the formal tools by which one would go about actually investigating something like this are in plain sight, right in front of him. He can pick it up tomorrow and start an investigation. But he chooses not to because I think, like many other situations, he prefers the issue and the kind of cattle prod that he uses to get his base ginned up. It's basically birtherism 2.0. There's literally nothing to it. And it's just as hollow and ridiculous as when he tries to push some weird medicinal cure from the White House podium that he ends up having stock in. It's ridiculous, and most of us have learned how to kind of tune out most of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does give us an idea of what the election is going to look like. And as you said, Barack Obama has thrown his support behind Joe Biden. And to that, I want to note the fact that there were 2 streams of last night's comments from the former president. One was broadcast for graduating high school students that people might have seen on American broadcast last night. There was another that was streamed for historically black colleges and universities. And that has me wondering, is that an admission that Joe Biden cannot rally black voters on his own?
Well, that kind of speculation would make much more sense if he hadn't gotten such a resounding mandate from the black voters of South Carolina, which propelled him into the lead and ultimately into being the presumptive nominee. So if one just goes based on how voters behave, the former vice president has very little problem with black voters. They're the reason why he's the presumptive nominee. So I think that essentially extinguishes that point. I think the former president would have been doing either one of these, and both of these are the results of invites, by the way. He didn't ask to be part of this. He was asked to be part of these events that were already going to be happening. And so I think he would have probably accepted those events anyway. It's just the content of what he said was probably changed by A, the fact that it's a cycle year, B, that the presumptive nominee is his former vice president, and C, the context, the landscape, the reflective surface that this is all happening within is the incoherence and the incompetence of the current administration.
Roger Fisk, thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.